Joining us for this conversation today on the summit is Dr. Beverly Rubik. Beverly, thank you so much for your time, and I'm so glad you could join us.
Thank you, Josh. It's my pleasure.
You're an expert on the body as an electromagnetic vehicle, I guess you could say, with the biofield and how that interfaces with technology, with fields, with our environment around us, with 5G and other wireless frequencies. You have a very solid academic, credible background as a PhD, and so really looking forward to this conversation and diving in and helping to connect the dots on and bringing it again back to each of us, right, and each of our own energy and power and the changes we can make. So yeah, looking forward to this. I'm just going to share with our audience. I'm going to read a little bit about your background here, and then we'll dive right in. Dr. Beverly Rubik has a PhD in biophysics from UC Berkeley and is internationally renowned for her pioneering work. In 1992, Dr. Rubik chaired a panel at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, that introduced the term biofield, and in 1994, biofield became a medical subject heading at the U.S. National Library of Medicine. Presently, she is conducting research to develop novel physical sensors for Qi to explore the extremely low-level light of life, or biophotons, and to investigate the health issues of humans exposed to wireless communication radiation. So that's really interesting. First of all, I have to say, like, that's, you know, I love this crossover work. You're a pioneer, you have a PhD, and you're, you know, focusing on this very important connection. So first I want to ask you, having read Dr. Robert O. Becker's book, his seminal work, The Body Electric, and it just in common sense how he explains how we are electromagnetic beings. You know, on this summit we're talking about electromagnetic radiation and everything outside of us, but we are electromagnetic beings. We often forget that, it seems. How foundational is an understanding of Dr. Becker's work, of that understanding, you know, of that fact that we are electromagnetic beings?
Well, it's absolutely foundational. He worked on salamanders and mice and showed they could regenerate, especially when you applied extremely small fields to limbs that were severed. But he also was a person I worked with in committees at the National Institutes of Health. And I knew him personally. We wrote a paper together. And I think today he would roll over in his grave if he realized the plethora of wireless communication radiation that is already on this planet. He was concerned about 60 hertz and 50 hertz, the power line frequencies, and childhood leukemia and brain tumors upon exposure because schools were close to power lines and issues like that. But today we have something totally new that in his lifetime didn't exist. We have this plethora of cell phone towers and of coming 5G with many cell phone antennas and even satellites that are going to be blasting the earth with even higher frequencies.
You've done pioneering work with regard to complementary and integrative medicine. Can you tell us just briefly about your history and about some of the key areas of work that you've brought forward?
Well, I'm especially excited about alternative and complementary medicine because I like to see softer, gentler medicine used before the big guns of pharmaceutical and allopathic medicine. And I think it's quite the reverse nowadays. People go in, especially for chronic disease, and end up taking drugs or getting radiation, and those are the big guns. But why aren't we starting with softer, gentler therapies, especially when living systems respond exquisitely to very small energetic signals, for example, in energy medicine. Things such as homeopathy that give infinitesimal doses of substances could be used instead of large doses of drugs. And exquisitely small doses of energy in the form of pulsed electromagnetic fields or magnetic fields can stimulate healing. And I think we should use those first before we turn to the big guns of allopathic medicine. So I've been exploring the biofield, the energy field of the organism, to try to explain how these exquisitely small signals may in fact work. I'm not convinced that they work initially at the molecular level. I think that that is part of it, but I think initially they seem to change the organizing field of the organism, the field that may regulate all of the biochemistry and physiology. And therefore, I focused on the biofield as the fundamental science that would help us explain both how energy medicine and these subtle integrative therapies may work, and in addition, how the hazards from environmental radiation from the communication technologies may also impact us. So I'm really interested in both questions, and here we're just discussing the hazards issues.
Later on in this talk, we're actually going to look at visual images that you have assembled from your work to do with live blood cell analysis and microwave radiation. So fascinating stuff, similar to how we did in Take Back Your Power, but to see additional data on that, I think is quite compelling. So, but before we get into that, let's dive into this understanding of the biofield. Is it akin to chi or prana or the force or the life force, or how is this? Maybe tell us a little bit more of a definition. What is the biofield, the human biofield, and where does it come from?
I think the biofield is maybe the closest that science can get to the notion of chi or prana. Those terms came from other cultures from the East, and they have a lot of mystique around them, and they also relate to a universal life energy that's everywhere in the cosmos. But with the biofield, I'm talking about something that science can address that consists of electromagnetic, electric, magnetic fields, of photon emission, of the real fields of physics that we can understand and measure scientifically.
So, and you've investigated what effects wireless radiation and other electromagnetic radiation has on the human biofield. You've measured it. We can actually visually see it, right? Tell us about that.
Yes, there are many ways to, let's say, approach the biofield, and there's no singular way. So we're looking at the different fields emanating from the human body. Even the brain has waves, the heart has waves, but I'm more interested in the more subtle energies of the whole body. And we use an instrument from Russia. It's actually a camera. This one is called BioWell, but it's based on digital form of high voltage electrophotography. What does that mean? If you've ever heard of Kirlian photography, it's related. So you place your finger on a charged plate, one by one, and we're inducing a light emission from the high voltage. Electrons are emitted from the fingertips, which then stimulate a light emission of gases around the finger. And so we're able to visualize then something about the energy field, and it really changes with respect to interventions, whether they're medical or stressors, such as bringing a cell phone near the body. And so we can see immediately, within seconds, how the biofield changes in response to the stress of an electromagnetic signal.
Okay. So, but just to further, my understanding, so the body itself is emitting photons of light, and you capture these photons, or you can view these photons with your Kirlian-like photography, a special technology that can photograph these. Is that right?
Actually, it's not quite like that.
Okay.
We have a different apparatus to measure the native light emission from the body, and that's called biophoton emission. And I have a figure showing someone showing the natural light coming out of a couple of fingers from work in Japan. Mm-hmm. But in this case, I'm looking, that light is so minute. There are maybe 40 photons per square centimeter per second coming out of the hand, and it takes hours to make an image. So I'm inducing the light image with high voltage. So the person is placing each finger one at a time on a high voltage clear electrode. It's like a glass electrode charged up to 5,000 volts.
Okay.
And then something called a corona discharge appears. This is an induced ring of light around the finger. And we're looking at the qualities of that light. How round is that image of light around the finger? How even is it? Is it sparky? All of those things tell us about the state of the organism, whether the person is healthy or stressed and relaxed.
Okay. Can you talk more about what these differences in our biofield are related to in terms of symptomology?
Well, the Russians have a big database of many, many people, and they've also done what's called a sector analysis of each fingertip. And so we know, for example, a particular finger, the sector at 2 o'clock, if you think of the round circle like the face of a clock, might relate to the thyroid. And so they've looked at a lot of people, and they can see people with a low thyroid or a high thyroid with respect to the sector analysis of each of the 10 fingers. But I'm not using it in that way typically. Holistic practitioners may use it that way. As a researcher, I'm looking at parameters such as the area of the light emission, the symmetry of the left and right hands emitting light, and the quality of the emission. Is it sparky or is it smooth? And I can compare, for example, a person who's practicing yoga or meditation frequently, who is extremely well regulated in the energy body. And then I can look at someone who's never practiced yoga, and I can see how they look. And I know what high level energy regulation looks like from studying a number of yogis and meditators. And then I know what stress looks like because I know what happens when somebody's dog dies and they're a regular client of mine and they come in for measurement, and I see how stress looks. So it's been documented. There's large databases then, especially maintained by the Russians who developed these cameras, who are able to, I can't say diagnose. In the United States, this is not a diagnostic instrument, but in several other countries, the camera that I'm using is a diagnostic instrument.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell us about what happens when you observe the subject and their biofield in the presence of, wireless radiation, microwave radiation, or even have you done any millimeter wave radiation studies? What happens and what do you conclude from what your observations there?
Well, I've tested only 4G radiation from smartphones so far. We don't have 5G available, but soon, probably. But in any case, what we see just after 15 to 25 seconds of holding a phone a call has been made, and the call is now trying to be captured. I already see changes in the biofield as people hold on to the phone with one hand. There's a left-right imbalance. First of all, the phone is usually held in one hand for the sake of a phone call. And so that produces already this left-right imbalance. But then there are also reductions in the energy emission, as well as increased sparkiness of the biofield, which indicates stress. That's classic. I've seen this in many cases, and in fact, as part of the software analysis, that this sparky image that results from stress is analyzed in the Russian software as stress or emotional pressure on a continuum from calmness to stress to high-level stress. And I've even seen electrosensitive persons show enormous stress upon holding a phone for some 25 seconds to a minute, making a call. So those are very short-term exposures. Now, if I do a little bit longer-term exposures, say 30 minutes, which is not unusual, people calling or holding a phone in an airport working, I see more profound changes in the biofield. Thing you can't miss visually, the differences between smooth, unimpeded flow of energy, round, perfect circles of light, to jumpy, sparky, distorted, left-right imbalanced images coming from their fingertips.
Okay, what symptoms or what diseases or chronic diseases or symptoms are associated with what you observe what you just described, the observations in the biofield?
Well, chronic stress is at the root of virtually all chronic diseases. So I'm looking at short-term changes, but people are utilizing cell phones throughout the day, constant exposure. Some of them are placing cell phones in their pockets, in their bras, carrying cell phones on the on position. So they're constantly exposed. And that means they're chronically stressed. And this is at the root of all chronic diseases, be it cancer, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disorders, you name it. So we're looking at the root of chronic disease here with chronic stress at its cause.
So have you done any studies with, you mentioned like someone holding a cell phone, right, for up to half an hour. What about if the cell phone is right touching the ear next to the head and the brain? Have you done any studies like that? And if so, how does the biofield then look comparatively?
Well, I'm unwilling to have subjects hold the cell phone near the ear for a long time because it really shouldn't be held near the ear. It should be at least an inch from the body. So in the studies I had sometimes short phone calls by the phone, say within an inch of the ear. And we see the same stress patterns, but you don't even have to hold it near the ear. Just holding it in the hand, it's within the biofield. I'm sure that holding the phone near the ear is producing changes in brain waves and other aspects of the biofield, but I'm looking at the whole body biofield, something more subtle than brain waves or heart waves in this case. So simply holding it in the hand, I get these changes.
Is it true? I've heard, I think from Heart Math Institute or others, that the human heart has a field much bigger than the brain even. Is that true? What have you measured in terms of the different parts of our bodies and the fields created?
Yes, the heart actually has a stronger magnetic field than the brain. The heart is the strongest electromagnetic emitter of the body. And the brain is secondary, but then there is more. There are the acupuncture meridians, 12 of them, 6 yin and 6 yang, carrying energy up from the earth, the yin meridians, and carrying energy down from the sky, and many portals to these meridians called acupuncture points. And these are part of the energy anatomy of Oriental medicine. Then there are the 3 dantians, the forehead area, the heart area, and the abdominal area. And all of these change. I haven't produced that data to show you, but I have seen changes in acupuncture point electrical conductivity as a result of someone holding a cell phone in the on position. So that's another measure. It's not highly visual, but we've seen the electricity then in all these meridians also shift into abnormal patterns.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we on the summit, we interview and talk with Dr. Martin Paul, Dr. Paul Haru, and others, but notably those 2 scientists on the mechanism that wireless EMF, the mechanism of harm or the mechanism effect that we see in the body. From your perspective, Beverly, would you like to, add into this conversation about what's your understanding of the specific mechanism? Is it, for example, that there's as another researcher has described, like a low-level electrocution, almost a microelectrocution happening that is at the basis of the cause of the stress? Is it that the electrical impulses in our brain and our heart and throughout our body are somehow hampered by these artificial external electrical signals pulsating upon us? Can you talk to us about that from your perspective, and maybe dial into the mechanism if you could?
Yes, one of the things we know about the biofield, let's take the brain for example, is that the brain can be entrained to make frequencies in pace with some external stimulus. For example, you can sound Tibetan bells that make beat frequencies or hemisync with earphones and drive the brain to make binaural beats to make a specific frequency. So external fields presented to the body tries to pace to them or And some of these fields, of course, go beyond brain and heart. There's many little fields being made by molecules having reactions. Wherever you have a charged particle moving in the body, you have a field being made. Now, there's how many particles in the body? There's ions, there's molecules, they're charged, and they're all moving around. So the conventional physics says where you have a moving charged particle, you have a field moving. I'm looking at the energetic aspects of this, whereas people like Dr. Martin Pall are looking at the molecular aspects of this. And I think there are two different storylines, but I don't think one is more true than another. We have to think of the body as a biomolecular machine on the one hand, and as a flame of energy on the other hand. And I'm talking about these signals thwarting that flame, distorting it, making it uneven and low level. I think about the biofield sometimes like, especially looking at these circles of light coming out of the finger, like the gas flames on a stove. You know, you can turn on the stove, and if it's skipping and not very stable, the flame may go out. It's not a good solid energy regulation. And so you want to turn up that gas. You want to have steady light being made from the biofield. You want to have steady energy flowing, as the ancients called it, the smooth, unimpeded flow of chi. And so I'm talking about that aspect being thwarted by these external fields that are so different from our biology. And here's another reason they're different. It's not just about the frequency of millimeter waves or microwaves. It's about the digital, highly pulsed nature of them. We are analog beings. Our biofield is steady, like a flame, a gas flame burning. And that's how we want our energy field to be. But as you know, digital communications are highly pulsed. They're strong fields, big pulses followed by periods of nothing, and then more pulses. And these are the communication between antennas and cell phones, and soon to be the Internet of Things. And that's the digital realm. We are analog beings, and there's no way living beings can adapt to this kind of digital signature of energy. It's impossible. It's just far too different from how we operate, with rather constant heartbeats and brain waves and continuous circulation of energy.
Yeah. Can you talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned chi, right? What do you see chi as the same way, or is it slightly different to spirit or consciousness or electricity?
Okay. According to Oriental philosophy, they've linked those things, and they say where the mind goes, the chi flows, and the flesh and blood follow. So what's primary, who is the controller or conductor of this symphony of energy, is the mind, is consciousness. And then the chi moves. And thirdly, the flesh and blood follow. So they would see any changes at the molecular level as being secondary, really, to the energetic changes. And it's certainly true that the speed of electromagnetism is the speed of light, 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. This is huge compared to, say, the speed of nerves involving molecular movement at synapse is about 20 meters a second. That's slow compared to the speed of light. So I believe that initial changes may be within the biofield, that if it's the regulatory thing of the physiology and biochemistry, then goes on to impact at the molecular and cellular and tissue level. But I can't prove that. There's got to be a lot more work to show that. But certainly I think that looking at life as an energy field is a viable way of understanding life, just as viewing it as a molecular organism isn't yet another way. And the two ways are really complementary. In physics, we have the view of the photon as a particle of energy and also as a wave of energy, the particle-wave duality of quantum theory. And we can take that now into quantum biology and say, on the one hand, life is a bunch of biomolecules. That's the classical chemical view. And on the other hand, it's a coherent field. And something has to tie it all together. I don't see how the DNA does that. What ties it all together in a coherent way? It's the biofield, in my view.
Yeah, thank you. So you are very well respected within academia, and we talked about your work with the NIH and other agencies. What do you say when your critics will say about you that you're practicing pseudoscience or try to minimize your credibility because it's not, their brand of science? How do you respond to that?
Well, I haven't heard those words out of anybody in many years. But in the past, I would say I'm working on a new paradigm of life that goes beyond just looking at life as a bag of biomolecules. And I'm looking to see how the mind interacts with the energy, which then interacts with the flesh and blood. And all of that is very important because we are conscious beings, and consciousness has been left out of conventional science. And that's especially serious in biology and medicine, where the mind has got to have a big role. I mean, we see that in the healing of amazing cases when people shift their mind and go on to have spontaneous remissions or use visualization. And so we know the power of consciousness, at least in its early stages. I think we need to cultivate that and really understand it more and utilize it in our medicine. But in any case, I think that there is an unfolding paradigm that's much greater than the conventional view. And I haven't heard those words seriously criticizing my work in many decades. As I see this paradigm is making headway in science, and many young people are quite interested in doing dissertation research in this area, and that's a good thing. The paradigm moves on. As one scientist put it, science advances funeral by funeral. That was Max Planck, and he was one of the fathers of quantum theory. And it just reminds us how difficult it was to introduce quantum ideas over 100 years ago. That was radical. And today we're introducing ideas of an energy body, of a biofield, and also being impacted by extremely subtle fields in our environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Well, let's dive into the blood cell analysis work that you've done, the live blood cell analysis. And we're going to show those two slides on the screen here, Beverly. So talk us through what are we looking at here and how are these effects caused?
Well, first, let me say what the design of this study. So this study had 10 subjects ranging in age from 27 to 75 years old. And first, they had to have very good looking blood. So they actually were eating a very, very good diet, because initially, if their blood didn't look good, I couldn't use them in the study. And most of them were cell phone users, about 80%. I did the study about 5 years ago. And I first took an initial blood test from the fingertip, a droplet of blood placed on a microscope slide under a dark field microscope. And there you see at the baseline in the upper left-hand corner how the blood looks initially without any exposure to cell phones. In this study, they had to fast and refrain from use of Wi-Fi or cell phones for 4 hours before they came to see me in the study. And then after the baseline test, I presented them with a cell phone, a smartphone running on 4G that was turned on, but they did not make a call. They wore it in a backpack for 45 minutes. The phone was in readiness mode to receive a call or text, but it did not. And then I took another blood test, and in this case, you see there were changes in the blood. As shown in the upper right hand of the photographs, the red blood cells became sticky and stuck together in what we call rouleaux or rolls, like looking at the edge of a roll of nickels. And with this, the peripheral blood circulation is compromised. The blood cells actually have to scrunch down in order to go through the tiniest microcapillaries in the body. And so when the blood is like this, it can't. So microcirculation is compromised. Not only did I look at fingertip blood, because in some cases they were holding the phone later, I looked at blood from the toe as far away as possible and found the same stuck together red blood cells. And after the second condition, which I call the carrying condition, then I had them use the phone for an additional 45 minutes. They went online on the internet, and they also placed the phone near the head for 2 5-minute phone calls. And at the end of 45 minutes, I took a third sample of blood. and found even further disturbing changes in the blood, as shown in the bottom photograph. Now the cells were broken apart from the rouleau, but they were distorted. The membranes showed shape changes and in many cases were spiky, appeared like bottle caps or spiky like a sea urchin. In fact, in hematology, these spiky cells are called echinocytes, after the echinoderm, the sea urchin. And they're not a healthy sign in hematology. This is a sign of, again, compromised peripheral blood circulation. So these are short-term changes due to, say, a 90-minute exposure to cell phone radiation, but that's a small part of the day, and people are using these cell phones throughout the day, as we know, and also exposed to Wi-Fi and innumerable sources from the environment, which is going to be magnified if 5G is installed. So we have a lot to think about in terms of effects not only on the biofield, but on the blood. And I must also add that both these tests that I've been doing, the biofield testing as well as this microscopic view of live blood, are tests done by holistic or integrative practitioners who are assessing health and wellness. And when we see changes like this, we know that people are moving away from high-level health and wellness.
So your study's predominantly on 4G, correct?
Yes.
What do you predict will happen with 5G?
Well, for one thing, they're not getting rid of 1, 2, 3, or 4G, they're adding more. So, and not only are they adding more in the form of higher frequencies, they're adding a plethora, a huge number of so-called small cell antennas all over the place in our residential areas and everywhere between 200 and 1,000 feet, I understand, because these waves are blocked by water and vegetation, etc. So they have to have many more antennas in place. And in addition to that, they're planning on some 20,000 satellites up in the lower Earth orbit, also producing the various band frequencies of 5G and blasting the Earth, so that there's not going to be a place free of these frequencies as there is now. I mean, you can go in nature now and be away from these frequencies largely, especially in national parks, I've noticed. So I'm expecting more debilitating effects both on the blood and the biofield as a result of this. And it's really hard to predict. We don't know, even though there's a lot of studies out there, and some of them have come from the military, because some of these bands of 5G have been used by the military, not only in radar, but in certain non-lethal weapons. I understand 95 gigahertz was used in the active denial weapon. So perhaps there's knowledge from the military that we don't know, but I've read a number of declassified documents as well as papers from all over the world showing and predicting effects from these radar band frequencies, which are not healthy. I would expect not only changes in the blood and biofield, but increased changes neurologically. Those are the things I'm especially afraid of. And we know that 5G will impact the skin and be absorbed by it. And the skin, of course, is one of the most important organs and linked to the nervous system profoundly. And not only that, but in terms of receiving radiation, is controlling a lot of our metabolism. So I expect very dire consequences of 5G if indeed it is installed. And I think we need to give this all a second thought. There's a lot of studies already out there, and we need to reconsider this before we rush into installing this widespread. And I think the fiber optics would be a logical alternative. I know it's expensive, and maybe we could not run things like self-driving cars, but we could run technology in homes and schools and industry with fiber optics alone. Mm-hmm. And so I would vote for that. As I know we need to continue expanding the technology and and making sure everybody's connected. It's a global world now. And I'm not for throwing out our technology, but I'm for safe technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dr. Timothy Sheckley on the summit, one of the things he talks about is the self-driving cars, and how even for those who see value and desire a self-driving car scenario, you really don't need 5G. You don't need instantaneous wireless communication from car to car. That's not necessary for self-driving cars, so that's interesting. Also, you mentioned active denial technology operating at 95 gigahertz as one of the frequencies. One of the criticisms of that is that the intensity or the power density used for weapons at that frequency is much less than what would be used, or much greater, obviously, than what would be used apparently for 5G. How would you answer that?
Well, in a weapon, it's a very short-term use. But with 5G, we're talking about use around the clock, 24/7, 365 days a year. Nobody knows really the impact of long-term, low-level chronic exposure to these frequencies because they've never been studied over the long term. So we are the guinea pigs, and I think that's completely wrong. We need to have some sense of long-term chronic exposure in key experiments before we jump into this.
What hope do you see for the future for protecting people from 5G frequencies?
Well, I've done a study, and I know there are certain numbers of technologies out there that claim to have protective effects against at least 4G, 3G, 1G, 2G, in the form of beneficial frequencies. Now, I'm also concerned that there are a lot of so-called devices on the market claiming protection that haven't shown me a peer-reviewed study by a third party. So I brush those aside. I did a peer-reviewed study on a technology that had some beneficial frequencies that were proprietary. I don't know what they were, and I'm not the inventor, but they showed an improvement of the autonomic nervous system balance in terms of the low frequency and high frequencies emitted in the heart tachygram. The ratio of those frequencies is related to autonomic balance. And there was an improvement with this technology embedded in cell phones and actually coming over the internet. And in this case, the subjects, who were 20 subjects in my study, they were not even touching the cell phone. And yet they showed an improvement in stress, just being, say, 1 meter, 1 yard away from cell phones with these positive beneficial frequencies. So I think we have to explore, because there's no a priori theory for knowing which frequencies of this God-given electromagnetic spectrum might have beneficial effects on our health. And certainly it's not frequencies near the microwave oven frequency, which heats water. And one of the communication frequencies is very close to that. Heating water is not a good idea when you're 70% water, so which living things are. So we need to explore what are the beneficial frequencies in the electromagnetic spectrum, and possibly we can use these for our communication frequencies, and if not, maybe embed them in our technologies to make them neutral, if not more beneficial to our health.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. It's not exclusively, mitigating through clothing and shielding. It's not just focusing on, well, what's helpful technologies and protecting ourselves there. And it's not just trying to stop the advancement of 5G. It's basic, and it's all of this, and it's also spreading information, spreading awareness, making accountable our elected officials, right, and the corporate executives. Would you agree that it's really a multi-pronged approach, and for anyone to say there's only one way to solve this problem, we might be cutting ourselves short, right?
Oh, I certainly agree with a multi-pronged approach. And I think our leadership needs to listen very carefully to the scientists and medical people and the experts, and not just the industry, who has profit motives above and beyond everything. And I'm frankly quite disgusted looking at the FCC. It seems to me it's a captured agency. It's captured by the industry. It's totally bending over backwards to serve whatever the industry says. And yet the FCC is not an expert in health and wellness or the environment. So we're losing a lot by allowing this small agency dictate to us what is to be done. And that's my understanding, that they've made rulings back in 2018 that the federal government is moving forward and local governments can't say very much about health and the environment, only about aesthetic issues. This is ridiculous. It's disempowering the purpose of local governments, the welfare and well-being of their constituents. So I also think prudent avoidance is very important to avoid chronic exposure, ongoing exposure, because we know that effects are cumulative. Just as with radioactive sources, you would not want a constant bombardment of X-rays. You go to the dentist, you're shielded with a lead apron, and you want to work with shielding too, perhaps for your home and for your body with protective clothing, and with sleeves to encase your cell phone so that it's not emitting if you're putting it in your pocket. So there are many things that we need to consider. And also, not least but not last, putting your cell phones on airplane mode, which really turns them effectively off, not even communicating with satellites, GPS. So people need to take into account all of these ways to survive and thrive if we're to move forward with this technology. But I think we really have to revision this technology before we put it out, because unfortunately, it wasn't, our welfare was not taken into account. The profit motives were, it seems to me, and the race. It's a race between Asia and the United States, so says President Trump. And that's also a very short-sighted thing, because it's a race toward shooting yourself in the foot, in my opinion.
Yeah, well said. Within the summit, Dr. Timothy Sheckley talks about and he lays out how we do the wired solution. And also within the summit, Theodora Scarato and several others talk about the rights that local governments do have and the strategies being used by local governments, both in the United States and can be applied in other countries, to turn the tables, to basically, fight back effectively against the FCC or whomever that a country's, governing agency is. And they're having results. There's a lot of cities that are standing up and getting involved. Even in April of 2019, you may have remembered this, there was a California Supreme Court ruling affirming their opinion that San Francisco, and thereby any other city, has much more power than the traditional sort of the understanding that the FCC would like us to remain under, which is that local governments and people don't have any power. It's just all there. So even the Supreme Courts of states are encouraging us to, not buy into the idea of being disempowered, to really, think creatively, get together as communities and local governments coming together and solving this problem through education, through awareness, through holding our elected reps accountable, not just informing them, though that has to come first, but holding them accountable. So yeah, it's very encouraging, I think, in the bigger picture. But at this present time, there's times where you just feel like it's an existential crisis, right? Whether it's 5G or like Monsanto or what's happening in the air or the water or the whole political system and just the division, the divide and conquer. Do you have any practical suggestions here as we move towards finishing this conversation, Beverly, that people could use to move through this time of, you could say, compression or deep challenge that we experience individually and collectively?
Well, I think it's helpful to work locally, but also think how we can connect these local organizational efforts, speaking out against this installation of 5G, how we can connect to make a larger organized effort to speak out. That's something that concerns me, because I think that all the little efforts being made aren't sufficient. So we need to move forward locally, but then connect more globally to say, no, it's not time to roll this out. It's time to rethink it before we roll it out. Because once it's rolled out, I fear that it's going to be very difficult for us to unroll it. So let's work locally with our neighbors, get them informed about what's going on, make sure people know how to use their cell phone properly without hurting themselves. I think that's essential, and reduce their exposure to the wireless radiation as much as possible by using wired. Whatever happened to that? And finally, connecting with larger groups to make an effort to stop this, because locally I don't think we're going to manage, given the dictums from the federal government and beyond, who made rulings that we only have so much power to handle aesthetics and placement. And this seems ridiculous. And I know there are lawsuits going on, but those lawsuits may drag out for a long time, as lawsuits tend to do. So how can we take our local efforts combined to make a larger organized rebuttal? That's the question that I'll leave everyone with, because somehow that needs to happen. I don't have the answer.
Yeah, very good. And just to the viewer out there, I would encourage you strongly. I mean, whether it's this talk or other talks by other amazing speakers in the summit, please, send this out to your contact list, to your email list, to your social media list. Share this information with your friends and your family and your colleagues. And that's really, what you're saying, Beverly, is that's the foundation, is spreading the awareness, spreading the information, spreading the encouragement that we are coming together and being the change. We're figuring this out together. We're open sourcing this, and we're, coming together to do this paradigm shift that you speak of in your science so wonderfully. Any final thoughts for our viewers?
Well, maybe this is the issue on which real global governance by the people, for the people, and of the people will really happen. I hope so.
Beverly, you are, as I understand it, are involved in the development of a new technology to measure the frequencies, measure the 5G frequencies. Is that correct? Is that a new device is being developed that you're part of because currently, it costs $10,000 or more to measure these high gigahertz frequencies. And so those testing devices are not in the hands of everyday people. Can tell us more about that?
Well, my understanding is, from what I discovered, the measurement devices for the 5G millimeter wave frequencies are tremendously expensive. You can pay $100,000 up to $250,000 if you really want to measure this, because it's military grade. And so there's nothing on the market. Nobody's going to be able to assess what is the level in their neighborhood or their home. Unlike 4G, where you can buy a small handheld $200 or less meter to assess the 4G bands. So this is a tremendous problem, because we're going to have to rely on just a handful of experts to measure that. And so, yes, I'm involved in an endeavor to try to make a simple device that we can measure at least some of these bands of 5G as we move into the millimeter range. Excellent.
And how much, what's the estimated price point do you expect, or the range of cost that it could be once this device is ready?
Well, I'm not certain yet, but let me say that we're in need of further funding to make this happen. We're at an early stage.
Okay.
Just procuring the equipment to produce the frequencies is very expensive. And we procured most of those devices that make the 5G frequencies. And now I can't really predict the cost of this device, but we're hoping that it would be less than $1,000.
Very good. Well, that is tremendous news. That would be a very valuable device. And so please do keep me and our viewers posted on that. Dr. Beverly Rubik, I just want to thank you for your work in the world, your pioneering efforts, everything you're doing and your wisdom and information that you're sharing us by coming on the summit today. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. It's my pleasure.